The 546th edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
And that could make a difference. Lawson at the buzzer. Got it! Maybe not. Ty Lawson wins it at the buzzer.
Deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Gets the roll. Here we go. Page has it. Carolina down one. 84-83. Page into the front court with 4 seconds. Page to the rim. Got it! Good. Got it! 9/10 of a second to go. Inbounds. Washington gets it to Warren. His full court shot. No good. Marcus Page baby. Does it for the Tar Heels. Carolina wins it.
Don't force it if you're Goss.
Comes in. Blocked by Meeks. Buried up ahead to Jackson. And he tucks it down for the 5-point lead. Matthews off the mark. And this year the confetti is going to fall for North Carolina. They're not going to be denied this time. Inside 30 overall. Love, top of the key. Oh! Big time delivery.
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome to another live edition of the Four Corners podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. Josh and Anthony here with you on a Wednesday morning after a busy day for Carolina basketball yesterday. We're here today to talk about a lot of news, a lot of notes for the program. The biggest news, of course, is that Seth Trimble will be back for his senior season. 2 targets are set to visit Chapel Hill at the end of the dead period, and Carolina is expected to be a big-time factor and a mid-major guard as well. So a lot to talk about, and so we'll go ahead and get right into it. We'll start with the pod thought of the day. We go to Seth Trimble for that pod thought. That thought is, quote, "My heart and soul belongs in Chapel Hill." And, that was what he said last year when he entered the transfer portal and then ultimately withdrew his name, came back to Carolina for his junior season. And he was primed to have a big year. In a lot of ways, he did, posting career highs in a lot of different categories. He, jumped out to us in a scrimmage at Memphis where he went for 33 points in a game without RJ Davis and was making all sorts of shots, making all kinds of plays. And it was a big part of what Carolina did at the end of the year, making the tournament, winning a game in Dayton, and then was as visibly upset as anybody after the game. And, one of the things that we talked about whenever the season came to an end was getting him back would be big, I think, for Hubert Davis and just a culture for a program that's going under another major overhaul with, 3 players already exiting the program. You've got at least 2 transfers coming in along with 3 freshmen. You needed someone to come back that knows what to expect from the head coach and can be that kind of leader that this team lacked at different points of the year last season. And we think Seth Trimble can be that guy. And, we were expecting this decision. This was not a surprise. It was he was expected to return all along, but he finally made that known yesterday. Yesterday afternoon, he did confirm that he was coming back for his senior season. And so, with the way that he played last year, he became a fan favorite. With the way that he carried himself off the court, signing autographs, always making times for the fans. We saw it firsthand at College Game Day. That's only going to further his standing within the fan base. And so I think it's fair to say that it's okay to be excited that Seth Trimble is back because Carolina has a senior guard and it's backcourt once again. And this is a guy that's feels primed and ready to have a big-time senior season now with RJ Davis no longer with the program.
Yeah, you should be incredibly excited. This is a guy that was kind of the heart and soul of this team for most of last season. RJ Davis, I think, certainly fit that mold as well. But this was definitely one of those guys that you saw improve as the season went along. You saw, the offensive game is still a work in progress, but defensively, he's your best defender. It's not even close, really. Him, Drake Powell is the closest that it gets. But the way that he brings ball pressure, the way that he can switch just about anything from the 1 through the 3, that's what you love about him. And that's why he's such a dynamic piece. And you saw how important he was when Carolina made the push late in the season. He was a big part of that. When Carolina, goes out and puts together the performance that they put together against San Diego State, great defensive performance from him. And, in that game against Ole Miss that Carolina loses, big part of the reason why Carolina had a chance in that one was because of the work that Seth Trimble was doing for Carolina on the defensive end first, and sort of sparked himself and the rest of the team on the offensive end. Love the way that he drives the basket. I think that's something that Carolina needs in their offense. They need guys that can get downhill, that can get easy points at the rim. Now, you'd like to see him finish a little bit better than he did in that game against Ole Miss at the rim. But for the most part, throughout the season, he did a really good job of finishing there. And he got to the free throw line really as much as anybody on this Carolina team a year ago. Him and RJ Davis were the two guys that really focused on doing that, but it's especially him. That would be how he would seek out his offense a lot of the time. So, yes, he is going to have to improve on the offensive end. He's going to need to take another step. That shooting stroke that was there and it was resulting in made shots. You're hoping that he can return to the form that he was in early in the season last year from beyond the arc, because as the year went along, once he suffered the injury and came back from it, he just wasn't the same shooter. You're hoping that maybe this year, if he can stay healthy throughout the entire season, he can come out and start the way that he did this past season. You go back to that scrimmage against Memphis, man, that looked like a completely different type of player, a guy that was capable of taking over just about any game, and it carried over into the first few games of the year. You're hoping that this year, especially with what's going to be an easier non-conference schedule, as we're seeing come together here over the last few days, I think this is certainly a chance for him to take another step next year and be the leader that Carolina needs him with his play on the floor, and really just as a vocal leader as well.
There's no denying he's got to improve as a shooter. He shot in the low 40% from the field, below 30% from behind the three-point line. I think a big thing for him is going to be what his role is on the offensive end. And I think that's going to be determined over the next week or so with how Carolina ultimately fills out its backcourt. As excited as I am to have him back, this is not a guy that I think you want being your point guard. I think that he's a much better two guard, a guy that plays off the ball, a guy that can really just live, in the paint at the rim with his ability, to push in transition. I think there's not many guards better in the conference in terms of going from coast to coast than he was when he would get a rebound and just force really a one-man fast break. And he's so athletic that he can get up, he can get inside the paint and draw those fouls where, it felt like at times when he was playing at a high level, he was shooting 6, 7, 8 free throws a game. And Carolina is going to need that next year. So, I also think he feels like a guy, as much as anybody on the roster that's coming back, that feels poised to take a step in that leadership role now that RJ Davis is gone. Because if there's one thing we can say about Seth Trimble, is that he is a talker. And he is not afraid to jaw with the opponents. You saw it in Maui. I saw it firsthand at the ACC tournament whenever he made an and one play against Duke right in front of me. And, there he was, jawing with Tyrese Proctor and some of those guys. And let's be quite frank, like Carolina needs that. And they need that emotion. Mm-hmm. They need that type of energy. That's what made the team 2 years ago so much fun, but it's why they were the way they are, because Cormac, Ryan, Harris, and Ingram just were so competitive, and that really permeated throughout the roster. I think this is a guy that has that edge to him, but just naturally deferred because there was a fifth-year senior on the roster that was an accomplished player, like RJ Davis was. And so I don't buy into the fact that RJ Davis held the program back. I saw, a guy on Twitter trying to create that or kind of start that theory up once again. Like, Carolina doesn't achieve the things they achieved this past season, which wasn't a lot, but they don't achieve half of that if RJ Davis wasn't on the floor. But I think Seth Trimble, as much as anybody, does benefit from him moving on. And unlike Jalen Washington, I think he's ready to be like the guy in the backcourt, maybe without having to be the guy that dominates the ball, that's having to set the offense, because there was no one more vocal down the stretch from the Clemson game on than Seth Trimble. Like, that was the guy who voiced his displeasure with his teammates after we went to Clemson and got blown out. He was the guy that after Jalen Withers, stepped in the lane on the court, you could see visibly frustration. But, when they went into the locker room, was there to have his back. And then, I don't know, man, when I watched the end of season press conference and I saw him talk about the season coming to an end, RJ's was different because he was processing his career coming to an end, but you could tell that Seth Trimble was pissed. There was almost like a motivation from the time they got beat to, I want to get back here and I want to advance deeper into the tournament. And so, we talk about leaders being natural and how they grow and develop into those guys. I think Seth Trimble is one of those guys, and that'll be a big benefit, a big boost for Hubert Davis, because he did not have that this past season. And it's a big reason why they were so up and down the first 2.5, 3 months of the year.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that you can say. And it's still okay with you not, saying anything against RJ, is that this is going to help Seth Trimble as a leader, because now he does not have to worry about having an older player that is in the same backcourt as him that you want to defer to. And, that part of that is, at some point, Seth, I think, just realized that, hey, look, I got to start saying something. Somebody's got to hold these guys accountable. And RJ is just not necessarily that vocal guy like that. So it's on me. I love the attitude and mentality that he takes, because that's what Carolina needs. They need that attitude. And that's the way to put it. It's not, anything egregious or anything like that. It's just a guy that, is going to talk when the opponents are talking. He's going to, demand the best from his guys on the floor. And that's the thing that this group lacked this past season. And I hope that he, steps into the role of being an extension of Hubert Davis on the floor. That's what Carolina needs so much more than anything else, is they need a guy that when things start to go wrong, there is someone there that can just calm the waters a little bit and get Carolina's focus back where it needs to be. Now, the hope is that Carolina is also going to go and get a veteran at the point guard spot that'll be able to help him with that. And, I know it's going to be tough. You're going to be saying, well, they're bringing in someone that's a transfer. How much of a leader can they be? Go back and look at the leadership of a guy like Cormac Ryan, of a guy like Harrison Ingram. That's something that Carolina needs as well. You need multiple guys that are bringing that same type of attitude, the same type of demands to the court for Carolina. But this is a great starting point. And, ideally, you're going to have him play at the 2-guard spot. You're not going to have him playing as your point guard. I know there are people that think that that's still going to happen. It could still happen if Carolina misses on some of the guys that they are bringing in for visits. But the ideal situation for Carolina is that this is the guy that is playing off the ball. He improves as a shooter, and you still have somebody that can attack the rim at the rate that he wants to. Because if you can get him to take another step forward as an offensive player, everything else that he brings is exactly what you need. And I think that's the first building block towards having a successful team this upcoming season.
Well, you mentioned him playing the 2 guard, and I think that's gotta be like a must. Like, if Carolina swings and misses on these guys and he's forced to play your 1, I think he's capable of doing that, but I don't think he would be as effective. When you look at his role for next season, this is a guy that spent time in and out of the starting lineup a year ago. But even though when he was coming off the bench end of the year was playing, 25 plus minutes a night, do you think that the fact that he's back, it's an automatic certainty that he's going to start? Or do you see a situation with some of the guys that Carolina is involved with in the portal at the guard spot where Trimble is still a big piece of what this team does, is definitely a part of the team's closing lineup, which is a whole heck of a lot more important than being a part of the starting lineup. But can you see a situation, a scenario where even though he's in his senior season, he is still being a productive guy that comes off the bench as opposed to settling into a starting role?
The ideal scenario would be that. Exactly. Would be that he's coming off the bench. He's really your most important bench player, your sixth man, but plays a pretty significant amount of minutes. That's what you would be hoping he could do. Is that going to happen? Probably not. Not with where Carolina is at right now. Not with the guys that they have targeted. It looks like it's going to be, one guy that they're going to pick up at that point guard spot. And then I don't think they're looking for somebody else that can play off the ball. I know, when I watched the tape on Honor Huff, I thought that was a guy that, maybe could play off the ball. That looks like that's more of his strength than playing on ball. But I don't think that's still someone that Carolina is nearly as invested in, not with them talking with some of the guys that we'll talk about here coming up. All those other guys are on-ball guys. Those are guys that are handling things offensively, setting things up. They share the ball well enough to be, play that one guard spot. I don't think that Carolina, I'll tell you this, they do not have anybody else on the roster that is going to take the starting spot away from him. With Ian Jackson gone, that pretty much tells me everything that you need to know, that it's going to be Seth Trimble. Because, I think – when you look at Isaiah Dennis, when you look at Derek Dixon, I think Dixon has a chance to be a contributor. And I think that's part of the reason why if Seth Trimble is the guy that starts, it's not necessarily the end of the world, because Dixon's a guy that can shoot the ball at a very high rate. One of the better shooters coming out in this class. I think Dennis, it's going to take a little more time. And that's why it's uber important to get that starting point guard in there, because if Seth is that guy that's playing your backup point guard spot when he needs to, if he's the guy that's playing mostly the 2 guard spot, you can live with that. And I think you can still be pretty successful, because I do think that the offensive game is going to take another step. But ideally, I would be the guy that would want, a starter at that point guard spot, a dynamic guy that can score the ball, and I'd want someone off the ball that can score it as well. That's why, when we talked about it the other day, I mentioned a guy like RJ Lewis. Again, love what Seth Trimble brings to the table. He's not better than the Big East Player of the Year. Like, that's a guy that if he was interested in coming to Carolina, which I got to be honest, I have no idea what is going on with his recruitment. I have not seen anything on him. I haven't seen anybody linked to him. It's truly one of the weirder guys in the portal right now. But if you could get someone like that, you should not be opposed to that if you're Carolina, because you're looking for guys that are going to be able to score the ball. And I just don't know if Seth Trimble is going to be able to do it at a high enough rate to, make you comfortable with not pursuing someone in the transfer portal, at least giving it a shot to try to go after someone like an RJ Lewis, like a Rodney Rice from Maryland, someone like that.
Yeah, I think, it's important to get this message across. It looks like Van Allen Lubin, if Carolina plays the way they've played under Hubert Davis, assuming he announces his return to Carolina, will come off the bench. If Seth Trimble comes off the bench, guys, that's a good thing. It's not a negative. These guys are good enough to start, and they're good enough to be impactful players. You looked at some of the games last year, like Seth Trimble and the comeback that fell short against Duke in the ACC tournament. It was him and Elliot Cadeau making the plays that got Carolina in the game. Vin Allen Lubin made winning plays that got Carolina into the tournament. But if you can have those guys coming off the bench, it means that you recruited really well in the portal, which Carolina has done with their 2 commits so far. They've done a solid job. You're looking to do a great job, and you can do a great job if you land the guys that we're about to talk about here in just a minute. And then B, and this might be more important, like now Carolina has legitimate depth that they just have not had under Hubert Davis. We looked at this roster every single year, and we've talked ourselves into there being depth. And then you get into the season, and by the time you get to January, Carolina's playing 7 guys, maybe 8 on a good night. If those 2 guys are for sure coming off your bench, I do think Carolina will be as deep as they've been all season long, and you got to be. Look at the teams that got to the Final Four, and look at the teams that advanced to the title games. Those teams were deep, and that's why Florida was ultimately able to win out because they were a little bit deeper than Houston, and Houston was a little bit deeper than Duke, and that ultimately prevailed on the biggest stage, which Carolina is looking to get back to. So if Seth Trimble starts, I don't think it's going to be a big indictment on what Carolina's ceiling can be. But if he's coming off the bench, an area where I think he's been more comfortable than he's been as a starter, I think that's a telltale sign of what Carolina was able to do in the portal. And I don't know how many teams are going to have guys like a Seth Trimble coming off the bench that have the ability to impact the game that he has. And even if he's coming off the bench, as we saw this past year, that's a guy that's going to play starter-like minutes. So excited for him. I think this is, the first real big piece of the puzzle for Hubert Davis as he's trying to rebuild the backcourt outside of the 2 incoming freshmen, because I think those guys can play. And I think those guys are going to be a big part of what Carolina does in the future. I don't think it's ideal for Hubert Davis and what feels like a make or break year to rely on 2 freshmen to carry that backcourt. That's why they've been so aggressive in the portal, trying to get guard talent, into the roster. And then I think it's going to be really fun. I think, we've seen this here the last couple of years, and it's what, makes Carolina so unique. We're gonna get to watch this fan base fully wrap its arms around its latest 4-year player. Like we just got doing it with RJ, who stayed here 5 years, and Armando Bacot and Leaky Black, and we saw the way that the fan base really fell in love with those guys, and it feels like Trimble is the next guy in line for this fan base to really just love and support and have his back when he has a bad game, and be there to cheer him on when he has a good game. His mom is very active on Twitter, loves to interact with the fans. And so I'm glad we'll have that for one more year. So I think, after getting VSAR over the weekend, the good vibes continued yesterday with Seth Trimble announcing his return for his senior season. Also, Carolina, the dead period comes to an end later this week, and the program is set up to host 2 really big, important transfer portal targets. It was reported yesterday the Michigan State transfer Trey Holloman will be on campus, and BYU transfer Cannon Catchings will also be on campus. I believe his visit is scheduled for Friday. At the time of the report, I don't think Holloman had released a date, but he's supposed to be on campus sometime in the near future. 2 guys we've talked a lot about. Catchings, a former top 40 recruit. So you're talking about a guy that's got a real high upside. Trey Holloman, you not impressed with the numbers. I looked at a guy that was just a tough guard that would bring a toughness to this backcourt with what he did at Michigan State and playing for Tom Izzo. I think he'd be a real boost, a real asset for Hubert Davis and this backcourt. We'll start, though, with Catchings, because less than 20, 30 minutes after it was reported he was coming to Carolina for a visit, Pete Nakos does a great job for On3 Sports, did the 24/7 equivalent of Crystal Ball of predicting him to come to Carolina, which I think kind of tells you a couple things. That might be a telltale sign of what Drake Powell is going to do in terms of going pro. But also, that would be the first real direct benefit of Jim Tanner being the GM because of his relationship with Tamika Catchings. When we talked about Cannon, we said this would be a pretty big priority because of, what is his body, his frame, what does look like, their size there. Former top 40 recruit, so there's a lot of talent there as well. What did you make of yesterday? How quickly it seemed that his transfer portal recruitment likely ends up with him being a Tar Heel when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I think it's almost a guarantee. I think that's your guy that's coming in. He's going to give you the size that you need. Again, very similar to Drake Powell. I think or how he was used this year at least. He'll be able to play either the 3 or the 4. Now, the thing is that he is 6'9", so he is certainly more apt to play the 4 spot than a 6'6" player like Drake Powell was this year. So, I mean, I like it. I think he's a guy that ideally, again, you're talking about someone coming off your bench. I think he's very similar to Jonathan Powell in the fact that you're looking at him as a guy that has some nice potential. You want to see his upside, but I don't know if this is a guy that you want starting for you when the season begins. Now, if Drake Powell leaves, then you're having a different conversation. This is probably the guy that you go with. I like, everything that you see from him. The shooting form is definitely there from the outside. The numbers are solid. Nothing that you're going to write home about. Nothing like, what we saw last year from a guy coming in that was shooting 46% from 3 like Cade Tyson. But 35% on 4 attempts per game is pretty solid. The one area that I'd like to see him be a little more involved at that size is rebounding. I think just 2.2 rebounds per game is certainly too little. You'd like to see him definitely be more involved in that. So I'll be interested to see, when Carolina brings him in, what exactly they expect his role to be. But I think this is a guy that has coming off his freshman year, has the length that you're looking for on a roster that you want to see the size increase. Became a starter as the season went along, started 15 games for them. So he has that experience as well. Played 17 minutes. You'd like to see a little bit more than that. That's the area that you kind of worry about is, does he have enough experience to become the starter for Carolina? But I think this is a fine situation to be in. I think this is, a guy that can help you. But again, we've talked about it and we said it with Powell. I don't think this can be the headliner of your class. If this is the headliner of your class, you've got Vasar in there, but I'd like to see someone else that Carolina adds. That's why I want one of those point guards, and that's such a big position of need too. I think you need another headliner, a guy that can score the ball at a pretty high rate for you. But, all things considered, I think this is a guy that you would like to bring in, and I think at this point it looks like a near certainty that it's going to happen for Carolina. So that would be 3 guys that Carolina's already brought in the transfer portal much earlier than they've done in years past, showing the urgency that this staff has right now with this group of transfers.
Yeah, look, he might not be a headliner, but he would be a real nice, I think, he'd probably be your number 3 because of the big man that you brought in. But you're talking about a 6'9" wing that can shoot 35, 36% from 3. And let's just be frank, that's an upgrade from where Carolina was at last year. Like you put that in Carolina's starting lineup a year ago, Carolina's not 23-14. They probably win a lot more games because they shoot the ball better. They would have shot the ball better than what they did primarily the first 2.5, 3 months of the season. And so, just with that body and that skill set, I think it'd be really hard to keep him, off the floor. And it's just, and the fact that he's a top 40 recruit, man, there's a level of talent that he hasn't even, scraped yet. Like he's going to get to another level. You just hope that he reaches that level at Carolina and not at another program. So I think that's one that the fan base would really get, a little bit more, juiced up about. I think Jonathan Powell was a nice start to this thing. Vasar, just with the need for the big man, definitely took it up a notch. You add this guy to the roster, and then Carolina lands at least 1 guard, maybe even 2. Then you're going to talk about Carolina really bringing in a class that can be that can really make a difference for Carolina next year. Speaking of the guard that could be on his way here. That's Trey Holloman, the Michigan State transfer. This might be the first real recruitment we see in the portal out of high school, because he's going to visit NC State as well, where the Will Wade effect in Raleigh might really come into play here. And I think it'll be interesting to monitor that, because, Will Wade has talked a big game since he officially became the NC State head coach. He was already talking a big game unofficially before that news came official. And that delusional fan base now believes they've got the second best coach in the triangle, and that he is going to put together a roster that will beat us a lot more consistently than what they've done in the last 25 years. So when you look at Trey Holloman's potential visit to Carolina, is this one where, it's fair to be disappointed if he leaves and doesn't commit? Or is this one where if Carolina doesn't get him, it might open up a door, an avenue to bring in a guard that's a lot more accomplished on the offensive end of the floor?
I think it's I'm leaning towards the latter, to be honest, because when I look at him, I mean, this is a guy that didn't start every game this past year as a junior, played 23 minutes per game. I mean, he started 16 of the 37 games that Michigan State played. So wasn't a full-time starter, but I mean, look, there are things to like about his game. I think he shares the ball at a very high rate. I think the fact that he played with two bigs this past year, they did a lot of screen and lob type stuff this year. I think that's something that Carolina could certainly get behind, especially if they are going to play Vasar and Lubin together. I think that's something that would fit very well with what Trey Holloman wants to do. I just worry about him being able to score the ball at a high rate. I mean, 9.1 points per game, shot 37% from the field and just 33% from three. Again, I mean, those numbers aren't terrible. Don't get it twisted, but they're certainly not where you need from a guy that is that you're hoping is going to be a big part of what you do scoring wise. And the thing that really stinks is that if you look at the year before, and again, it's, less minutes, but really only 4 less minutes, really almost 3 less minutes at 19.7 per game, only scores 5.7 points, but shoots 47% from the field and shot 42% from deep. Those numbers go down with the more volume. So you're just concerned that that's going to happen at Carolina too, especially if he's playing more minutes. Like, Carolina is going to need this guy to play almost 30 minutes a game. And I just don't know if that's necessarily where he fits. I think you look around at some of the other options that Carolina has been looking at. And I mean, look, Xavier Lee, that should be the guy. That should be the guy that's on top of the list for Carolina. I was a little skeptical when I first heard that he was from Princeton. You throw on the film from him, and you see a guy that's incredibly dynamic, can score just about anywhere on the floor, creates his own offense, really good spot-up shooter, which is really hard to find when you look through a lot of these guys. There's always some areas of weakness for a lot of these guys, but I mean, he just about every area of his game, he is really strong in, shares the basketball very well. But the problem is that Florida is on him. There's some other big schools that are on him as well. And I mean, he was, at the national championship game and was going behind the scenes with Florida and everything like that. I would be stunned if he actually ends up coming to Carolina. I think that's one that you're just hoping that Carolina is in contact with, and eventually they can get him on campus. But then there's another name that's surfaced, and one guy that I watched this morning, and Kyan Evans, the transfer from Colorado State, who I think is a better shooter than Holloman is. I think passes the ball at a pretty decent rate, very similar to what you see from Holloman. So I think that there are better options in the portal, but I do think that if Carolina does go this route, it's still one that can work out for them. It's just maybe there's a little more hesitancy in terms of the preseason expectations than with some of these other guys. But with some of these other guys, people would counter and say these are guys coming from mid-majors, and Carolina hasn't necessarily been successful. My thing to that, because I saw someone that put that on the article that we wrote about Carolina's interest in Xavier Lee. the thing is that you can't just say, well, Carolina hasn't had success with some of these mid-major guys, we got to stop recruiting them. You just had a guy that won the most valuable player of this year's Final Four come from Iona. He was a 0-star recruit coming out of high school. There are talented guys at that level. It's just about finding the right talented guys, and I think Xavier Lee could certainly be that guy.
Yeah, when I look at Holloman, I just look at a guy that I think impacts winning, whether he shoots the ball well or not. He just feels like a guy that, coming from the Michigan State, playing for Tom Izzo, is just a winning basketball player. Carolina needs that. You need a winner on the floor, a guy that's going to be a difference maker, whether he's putting the ball in the basket. Is he still going to get in the stance and then guard? Is he going to, make the extra pass? Is he going to make the right, switch defensively and communicate defensively? And so that's why I think I'm a little bit more higher than him than you are. It's just someone that watched a lot of Michigan State basketball this past year. And he played on a team that all around they could not shoot. I mean, he's one of the worst shooting teams in the country. And it was ultimately their undoing in the tournament. So it wasn't like he was just the only bad shooter. It was a roster full of bad shooters. The main reason was because the way they played. Like, because they played with two bigs, there wasn't a lot of floor spacing. A lot of shots were contested. You think you could get easier shots playing, in Carolina system where everything's a little bit more opened up. So it would not be the most sexiest addition, but I do think there would be a lot of upside to him, and he could be a guy that could, I think, really just impact winning, whether he puts the ball in the basket or not. But Xavier Lee, I think, is going to be the guy that is going to garner Carolina's the fan base's attention, let alone Hubert Davis, Jim Tanner's attention as well. Adam Zagoria reported yesterday that Carolina, Florida, and St. John's are going to be pretty heavily involved with them. Which would, if you're going off the surface with those two schools involved, this is going to come down to money. Florida just coming off a national championship. They said once they made the Final Four, they were already recommitting $6 to $8 million in NIL. We've mentioned the St. John's former alumni who owns, I forget which company he owns, but has basically told them, you've got a blank check. You tell me what you need, and I can give you the resources to make sure you have what you want. And so, I don't know how many times that Carolina's been outbid so far this year for a player. It feels like the guys that they haven't gotten, we're just going somewhere else to begin with. This one feels like the first real money player that Carolina is going to be involved with, and that's where they struggled a year ago. When you got to the Adutieros and some other guys that they eventually missed on, it was basically because of money and because of what was being offered. So, there's no doubt. I think that's a guy you look at and say he can play at the next level. Like, you're always going to have your doubts and your concerns, especially because Carolina has struggled to develop those guys. But I think that's a guy that no matter where he goes, he can play at the next level. If we're going to come down to, is Hubert Davis, is Jim Tanner, are those two guys comfortable getting into a bidding war? Because that might be what it takes if they want that guy to end up in Chapel Hill as opposed to Gainesville or Queens.
Well, the other thing is that you got to count the people who were, or the teams who were going to be involved with Robert Wright. You're probably going to have to count them in that category as well. He's going to BYU. It seems pretty obvious at this point that he's going to get, they're saying $3.5 million. I don't know if anybody else is going to be willing to offer that. The only one that I think that I've seen on that list that would be willing to offer that is probably Duke. And if Duke doesn't get him, I would imagine that Duke is going to be in on Xavier Lee as well. So then you add them to the race. You add anybody else that was hoping to get Robert Wright. I mean, this is going to be an incredibly, incredibly popular race here. So I think Carolina's got to be prepared for that. Are you willing to spend the money on a guy like this? I think that you should be willing to spend the money on someone like this. I think this spot is the one that you need someone at the most, and you need someone that can score it, because where is the scoring coming from on this roster? right now. Even if you bring back Drake Powell, I mean, are we expecting his offensive game to take that significant of a step? Are we expecting Seth Trimble's offensive game to take that significant of a step? If you're bringing Vin Allen Lubin off the bench, you're going to be restricting his scoring ability. And, you know, Vasar is a guy that can score the ball. There's no doubt about that. He's done it in the time that he played at Arizona. But is he a guy that's going to be averaging 15 a game or more than that? I don't see that happening. So then you're putting all of the pressure on Caleb Wilson to be that guy. And I don't know if that's necessarily the way you want to go. I think he's a guy that you would like to see for Carolina start the season as a starter. There's no doubt about that. But I think you want to have some guys that are veteran scorers. So I think that's why Lee is an incredibly important target for Carolina. Someone like Kyan Evans possibly is someone that Carolina could go after. Didn't score the ball a ton at Colorado State. I mean, 10.2 points per game, not nothing, but it's certainly not where you're needing that to be. But there are other guys out there that I think Carolina should still take a look at as well. That's why I talked about R.J. Lewis, Lawan Wells, the transfer from Washington State, who it doesn't seem like a lot of people are involved with. That's another guy that I think could certainly be on the table for Carolina as this thing goes along, or should be on the table for Carolina as it goes along. They need that scoring threat, and that's why I would be willing to put my money in on a guy like Xavier Lee and go all out.
Yeah, and I think we'll have to see just how this ultimately all plays out, because that's what's going to be what determines it more than anything. I know we're supposed to get the house settlement. I think it's either this week or next week, which means some of this stuff will come a little bit clearer into focus. These schools, I think, are still trying to determine how they're going to divide up the revenue sharing and how much they're going to give to each program. But this has to be a guy that, you know, if Carolina wants and they identify as a difference maker, then, you know, there needs to be a bag that's going to be involved to ensure that he comes to Chapel Hill and can be a part of the backcourt for next season, because as well as they've done right now, and I think you got to like with where they're at with the 2 additions so far. They appear to be headed to a third that they could get as early as this weekend. They've got to add backcourt scoring. Like, not being able to find a suitable big man to replace Armando Bacot was the cardinal sin a year ago. If they don't add backcourt scoring, that'll be the cardinal sin for this offseason, and could be what holds the roster back and the program back, and what's going to be a very big season next year for the head coach and just the overall direction and future of the program. So we'll have to see how this thing ultimately all plays out. The good news is that, you know, they've cast a wide net. They're involved with as many guys as possible, so they have plenty of options at their disposal. They just got to see how many of these guys they can ultimately get to Chapel Hill to be a part of 2025, 2026. With that, guys, that is going to wrap up this edition of the show. Before we let you go, we're going to direct you to the website. That's HeelToughBlog.com. Yesterday was a busy day for the website with all the news coming out around Carolina basketball. 3 articles were up basically within an hour in terms of Seth Trimble's decision to come back, Cannon Catchings setting his visit to UNC. All that stuff was covered for you guys in individual articles, so you can go back, read about these decisions a little bit more in depth if you feel free. Carolina football also staying busy as well on the recruiting trail, spring practice winding down. So Anthony has you covered with that information. So make sure you go to the website. That's HeelToughBlog.com. At least 1 to 2 articles go up there fresh every single day, and we're keeping you up to date as best we can on the 2 big programs on campus. That's, of course, basketball and football. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. Every major podcasting platform. Simply search the Four Corners Podcast. There will pop up. There, we encourage you guys to rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any editions of the show throughout the remainder of the off season. So with that, guys, it is going to wrap up this edition of the show. I do thank Anthony once again for hosting with me. We want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.